Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and we're going to do some box office reporting and talk about Eternals and its opening box office weekend within US cinemas. Now the film was released worldwide on November the 5th, 2021, and it is of course the 26th entry within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you can check out my non-spoiler and spoiler reviews of the film, and I will leave the links within the channel as well. So we're going to discuss quickly its box office take and talk about whether the film is indeed the first real failure within the MCU, as it has been speculated recently, or whether it has actually met or even exceeded expectations. Now, as of today, it's been reported that Eternals has grossed around 71 million in its opening weekend. So is this a good or bad take? Well, for me, it's not the disaster that many have been claiming it to be. As you all know, there's been so much discussion and debate surrounding the film in terms of its supposed diversity and representation, the unique and different tone, and certainly the art house sensibilities brought about by Chloe Zhao regarding the movie, and how these elements made it feel very much out of place in terms of what audiences normally expect surrounding a MCU entry. The fact that it's tried something different outside of the Marvel formula has certainly divided both fans and critics. We've had all of the various ongoing debate regarding the Rotten Tomatoes score and the supposed review bombing. And of course we have the ongoing bias and antagonism, you could say, towards the MCU because it's owned by Disney, of course. Many people are still angry about what happened with Gina Carano or what happened with Star Wars. So I've noticed lately, certainly within the last 5 to 6 months, there's almost been this growing eagerness to see the MCU fail. Now, in general, when we look at the MCU, it's generally had a favourably positive outtake in terms of both critics and audiences. It's one of those instances where you go into a Marvel film and you either really like it or you feel indifferent. We can't deny that the MCU Phase 4 has had a mixed start. Now, I've made various videos about this, and you can check them out if you want to go into that discussion in more detail. But in general, I think people have been so accustomed to everything that Marvel releases being an absolute banger, whether it grosses $1 billion. And we could argue that Marvel have tried to do different things in terms of the Disney Plus shows, and very much so with Shang-Chi and the Eternals. Then you are going to get much more of a divided feel, right? When you try and break out the formula, when you try to do something that people don't expect, then you're going to get a mixed reaction. That's just the normal way of things, whether you're doing a Marvel film or any other movie. And there's always been this back and forth. Well, we don't like the Marvel films because they always play the same. So when we get a film that does something different, well, we don't like that either. So it's a bit more nuanced to that argument, but that's a general rule of thumb. That's what I'm seeing in terms of the overall reaction to this film. There's also been a discussion about certain fatigue within the MCU, and we can't deny that after 26 films, and particularly when we got to Endgame, which was really the exhaustive point of the MCU, you know, considering what happened there in terms of battling Thanos, and we had all of the characters within the franchise in that climatic battle at the end, you did come away from Endgame thinking, where else can they go with it? How much higher can they really take the stakes? It doesn't really get any bigger than Thanos snapping away half of the universe. What can they do to supposedly top that event? So there's all that debate going on. So when we look at those overall topics being discussed around this movie, I think that 71 million is quite a decent to good take, considering the fact that the Eternals, it was largely an unknown property, the fact that it was a very limited run by Jack Kirby to begin with, so even the more comic book fans had really no big recognition in terms of the Eternals itself. Now, people will say, well, the likes of Doctor Strange and Black Panther and Captain Marvel, they weren't very known amongst the general audiences. No, that's true, but they were much more known amongst the comic book fans. We all had an idea of Doctor Strange. We knew Black Panther was an established member of the Avengers before his own movie came out, and we knew Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel. But we had very little knowledge of the Eternals. So again, you have to factor that into play in terms of its overall box office performance. Now, when we look at the opening weekend of Eternals itself, it ranks alongside the 4th highest opening weekend of this year, behind Venom, Let There Be Carnage, which had 90 million, Black Widow, of course, had 80 million, and Shang-Chi had 75.4 million. So again, I think that's very encouraging signs for, again, an unknown property. I really don't think that's a disastrous opening weekend for the movie. Now, comparatively, yes, that is a low opening for Marvel, but again, you're comparing that to the pre-pandemic era when you're looking at the likes of Black Panther, Captain Marvel, and all of the Avengers films. All of those movies had 100+ million opening weekend. Now, despite the fact that we are very much recovering from the pandemic, it was very unlikely to expect Eternals to become the first movie to open up to 100 million opening weekend this year. I think we can genuinely agree that the only movie that's got any chance of that is Spider-Man No Way Home. Considering that Venom Let There Be Carnage got to 90 million, it's fair to say that we can expect Spider-Man to get 100 million. But there's no way at all you would have expected that for Eternals. So to gross 71 million despite all of the negative buzz, I think it's a testament again to how strong the Marvel brand is. And if we look at it, Fast 9, Venom 2, Let There Be Carnage, both had terrible reviews, and yet they still had big opening themselves, and they've gone on to become some of the highest grossing movies throughout the year. So when we look at the worldwide take of Eternal, so far it's grossed around 161.7 million worldwide, which is overall the second best opening of the year globally behind Fast 9, which grossed 163 million. So again, that's encouraging signs for the Eternals itself, indicating the strength of the brand as I mentioned before, and at the very least there was some initial interest in terms of the overall film. And you can't deny that some of the actors were quite prolific in terms of general perception, if not overly in terms of box office potential. We all knew who Richard Madden, Kit Harington, Angelina Jolie and Salma Hayek. We all knew those actors in some way, shape or form. So that would have attracted a lot of global audiences to this film as well. So of course we will all look to the second and third weekend drop to really give a bigger indication of whether Eternals is overall going to be the first real flop within the MCU. Now in previous videos I've talked about how I felt that if Eternals gross anything below 300 million, then I would deem that a real flop within the MCU. So far it's already got halfway there. So when I'm looking at these viewings overall, and again we'll have to revise this when we look at the second weekend, I'm probably going to say that it will gross at the very least 300, maybe 350, looking at these overall figures. So I think again, if it can get close to 400, I wouldn't deem that an overglowing success for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I wouldn't deem it a disastrous flop either, given the fact, and once again, I know people don't like hearing this, but we are still post-pandemic era, and the fact that Eternals, like Shang-Chi, won't get a China release either. Bear in mind that Fast 9 and James Bond No Time to Die got a China release as well, so you have to take that into account when looking at the overall figures. So overall, when we look at Eternals, of course it's not going to be the big box office blockbuster that Marvel was hoping for, and there's no way to tell how good or badly Eternals would have performed if we were in a pre-pandemic era. I think it's safe to say, if let's say we take it into a pre-pandemic era and it did get a Chinese release, then it definitely would have grossed higher than 161 global weekend. I think that's safe to say. Again, I'm just feeding off the momentum that Marvel had certainly back in 2018 and 2019 as well. I think if Eternals had been released shortly after Black Panther, I think it would have grossed higher at the box office as well. But when we look at Eternals overall, and we deal with the fallout in terms of its overall reaction and its box office performance, the fact that it clearly is an attempt to branch out of the formula, they clearly want to do something different, which is good, and I've stated multiple times that is the right direction to go. You can't just have continuous Iron Man, Captain America and Thor movies, because that will indeed make the brand stale. You have to try new characters, and in many ways that's what made the Marvel brand so successful to begin with, is that they took risks on Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man and Doctor Strange to begin with. But I think they do have to bear in mind what characters they are considering to bring to the screen. And were Eternals a character that people really wanted to see? Was there enough about the concept, about the source material, that really made it accessible to mainstream audiences? There are so many other characters within the Marvel Cinematic Universe that they could have brought to the big screen and may have had a far more reach in terms of accessibility in terms of mainstream and general audiences. There's also the debate about how far does Marvel want to go in terms of trying to gain much more of a critical credibility. There's no doubt about it that Eternals was a big push in order for them to gain more favour in terms of mainstream critics and more indie critics. I think Kevin Feige is very much well aware of the general perception of the Marvel films, is that they are regarded as playing it safe, very much cookie cutter, nothing too substantial, nothing too ambitious, if you like. And I think Eternals was an attempt to change that perception. So there was always a chance they were going to have more misses than hits, but I think in general what I would hate is them to look at Eternals and maybe because it didn't gross 500 million plus, or it didn't indeed get the Oscar nominations, that Marvel will revert back to type, and then we're going to get far more of the staying true to what's worked before, and we're just going to go back to basics with the comedy and the goofiness. Certainly is what we saw within Thor Ragnarok. I think that's a good example where after For the Dark World, they weren't really sure where to take the characters, so they reverted back to much more of the Guardians of the Galaxy tone, and that garnered them huge box office returns. So we're going to see a doubling of that with Thor: Love and Thunder. I really hope that Marvel continues to be more brave, but at the same time have an understanding that if you're going to do that, then you have to make sure that the characters are more appealing on a personality level. I would advise not to introduce 10 characters all at once. I think that, again, that was too much for the audiences to take. And I think also streamline your themes and concepts. So if you're going to have them, make sure they still have a correlation with the overall plot so that everybody doesn't get confused or a bit distracted as you're throwing all of these different themes at them at once. And all I would say is, for anybody complaining about Eternals, don't complain if you get Thor: Love and Thunder and Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and you do get that return to much more of the comedy and the one-liners and the quips, and then complain about that as well. Right? Because Marvel have attempted to give you something different here, and just because something is different doesn't necessarily mean it's good, but they've attempted to give you something different here and you've largely rejected it. So don't complain too much when they revert back to what worked before. So that's all I'm saying. But anyway, we will see what happens within a particular fallout of Eternals, and certainly in the second and third weeks. And of course, if we get any particular big headline news, then I will cover that as well within the channel. So let me know what you think in the comments below about Eternals. Do you think that its 71 million opening weekend is a flop? Is it a success? Do you think we should wait and see for the second and third weekend? Do you think it's written off? Do you feel they've kind of defied all of the naysayers and the haters and the trolls? What did you think about the recent online trending comparing it to Zack Snyder and the Justice League movie? I think it's ridiculous in many ways, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification button so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.